At 9:11 in the morning on the 25th of October 1944, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita commanded the most powerful surface fleet the Empire of Japan had left. He stood 2 hours steaming distance from an American beachhead. He had 4 battleships beneath his flag. He had the invasion of the Philippines within his reach, and he gave an order that no historian has ever fully explained. He turned away. He turned away from victory. He turned away with the American landings almost in his hands, and the story of why he turned and of 7 small warships that stood between his fleet and the greatest disaster the United States could have suffered since Pearl Harbor begins 2 years earlier on a dark dock in the mouth of Manila Bay, with a promise spoken in the night by a man who had been ordered to run. October 20th, 1944, Leyte Gulf, the Philippines. The landing craft grinds against a sandbar 50 yards from shore. Its ramp drops with a metallic clang, and Douglas MacArthur, 64 years old, steps into knee-deep salt water. His khaki uniform darkens as the Pacific soaks the fabric to his thighs. He does not smile. He does not wave. Behind him wade his staff officers, the president of the Philippine Commonwealth, Sergio Osmeña, and a war correspondent with a heavy microphone. MacArthur walks toward the beach without breaking stride. Cameras click. Somewhere in the trees, Japanese snipers still hold their positions. The general does not appear to care. He reaches a portable radio set on the wet sand. He lifts the microphone, and in a voice that will be replayed in newsreels across America for the rest of the century, he speaks. People of the Philippines, I have returned. Behind him, out beyond the horizon, floats the largest naval armada in the history of warfare. 200,000 men, 700 ships, 2 American fleets positioned to shield the invasion from any Japanese counterattack. But those 2 fleets answer to different commanders. They are forbidden to speak directly to one another. And in 5 days, that gap in the chain of command will nearly hand Japan the greatest naval disaster the United States has suffered since Pearl Harbor. To understand how the American Pacific War reached this moment, we have to go back. Not 2 years. Not even to the burning wreckage of Pearl Harbor. We have to go back to a single night in March of 1942 on a small dock in the mouth of Manila Bay, where a defeated general made a promise he could not keep alone. March 11th, 1942, Corregidor Island. The sun has been down for hours. In the tunnels beneath Malinta Hill, the flickering electric lights hum against the stone walls. Wounded American and Filipino soldiers lie on iron cots. The air smells of sweat and diesel and infection. Somewhere outside, Japanese artillery pounds the Bataan Peninsula across the water, where thousands of starving American and Filipino troops still hold the jungle. They will not hold it much longer. Douglas MacArthur, 62 years old at this moment, stands on the dock at the North Mine Wharf. Beside him is his wife, Jean. Behind them, held in the arms of a Chinese ama named Ah Chu, is their 4-year-old son, Arthur. Waiting at the dock is a PT boat, PT-41. Its commander is a young Navy lieutenant named John D. Bulkley, 31 years old, whose small squadron of plywood torpedo boats has been the last effective American naval force in Philippine waters for 3 months. Franklin Roosevelt, 4,000 miles away in Washington, has ordered MacArthur to leave, to abandon Corregidor, to abandon Bataan, to slip through the Japanese naval blockade under cover of darkness and make his way to Australia to take command of what remains of Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific. MacArthur did not want to leave. He offered to resign his commission and fight as a volunteer. Roosevelt refused. The order stood. Now, on the dock, MacArthur turns to the American officers who are staying behind. Men he has commanded. Men he is leaving to die or to surrender. He says only a few words to each of them. Then he boards the boat. 9 days later, after 4 torpedo boats have run the Japanese gauntlet through storm and sea, after a flight in a battered B-17 from Mindanao to Australia, MacArthur steps onto a train platform at a small country station called Tiroe in South Australia. Reporters gather, a microphone is thrust toward him. He speaks a single sentence that will define the next 2.5 years of his war. I came through, and I shall return. Not we, I. The promise is personal, and a personal promise made by a man who commands the loyalty of millions is not easily contained. By the summer of 1944, MacArthur has kept the first half of that promise. He has fought his 2,000 miles from the jungles of northern Australia, up through Papua New Guinea, through Buna and Gona and Ley and Salamaua, through Hollandia and Wakti and Bayak. He has done it with the American Sixth Army under Lieutenant General Walter Kruger, 63 years old, a Prussian-born professional who joined the U.S. Army as a private in 1898 and rose to command an army. He has done it with the 7th Fleet, a smaller naval force placed under his command in 1943 by the Navy under protest, commanded by Vice Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, 56 years old, a career naval officer. Kinkaid was not MacArthur's personal choice. He was appointed to the command through the naval chain, and he remained, in the way that mattered, the Navy's man. That distinction will matter. Meanwhile, across the vastness of the Central Pacific, another American war is being fought. A war that answers to a different commander. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the headquarters of Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Fleet, Admiral Chester William Nimitz, 59 years old. He is a small man, quiet, white-haired, blue-eyed. He was born in Fredericksburg, Texas, in a stone hotel run by his German immigrant grandfather. He grew up landlocked on the Texas Hill Country prairie and dreamed of the Navy because his grandfather told him stories of sailing ships. He graduated 7th in his class at Annapolis in 1905. He spent much of his early career in submarines, unglamorous, dangerous work in the years before submarines had earned respect. He was passed over for major sea commands more than once. He was court-martialed as a young ensign in 1908 for running his destroyer aground and received only a letter of reprimand. On December 31st, 1941, 24 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Franklin Roosevelt chose him over more senior admirals to take command of the shattered Pacific Fleet. Nimitz put on a khaki uniform, flew to Hawaii, and took command aboard the submarine USS Grayling, because the wreckage of the battleships was still burning and there was no proper vessel available for the ceremony. In 2.5 years, he has built the most powerful naval force in human history. Fast carriers, the Essex class, the Independence class light carriers, modern fast battleships, Iowa and New Jersey and Wisconsin, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, amphibious ships, oilers, repair ships, a floating logistical empire capable of sustaining 3,000 miles from the nearest base. He commands hundreds of thousands of sailors, and he commands them quietly. Nimitz does not shout. He does not give speeches. He plays horseshoes on the lawn of his headquarters in the evenings with junior officers. He listens more than he talks. When he disagrees with a subordinate, he asks a question. When he disagrees with a superior, he writes a memorandum. He is, in every way that matters, the temperamental Douglas MacArthur, opposite of Douglas MacArthur. And in the summer of 1944, these two men are heading directly toward one another. The strategic problem in the Pacific has never been solved. Since 1942, the war has been fought under a divided command structure. MacArthur commands the Southwest Pacific area, ground forces, land-based aircraft, and his own 7th Fleet. Nimitz commands the Pacific Ocean areas, the main Pacific Fleet, the fast carriers, and the Central Pacific Offensive. Neither reports to the other. Both report to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington. The Joint Chiefs are 4 men: General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, 63 years old; Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, 65 years old. Cold, brilliant, savagely aggressive naval officer whose own daughter once said of him that he was the most even-tempered man in the Navy, always in a rage. General Henry Arnold, commanding the Army Air Forces, and Admiral William D. Leahy, 69 years old, Roosevelt's personal chief of staff, the senior military officer of the United States. For 2 years, this committee of 4 has tried to hold together a war being fought by 2 commanders who cannot stand one another. Now, in the summer of 1944, the question can no longer be postponed. The Central Pacific Offensive has taken the Marianas, Saipan, Guam, Tinian. B-29 bombers can now reach Tokyo from airfields Nimitz's forces have built. MacArthur has cleared New Guinea. The next move must be decided. MacArthur wants the Philippines. He wants to keep his promise, and he wants the Pacific Fleet. He wants the fast carriers and the fast battleships and the veteran amphibious crews Nimitz has built, redirected south, placed under his strategic command, and used to liberate the archipelago from which he was driven in 1942. The exact percentage he demanded has never been documented in the historical record. Popular retellings speak of 80% of the Pacific Fleet. What is documented is the substance of the demand. MacArthur wanted operational command over the naval forces required to invade the Philippines, and he wanted the strategic priority of the entire Pacific War reoriented around that objective. The Navy sees the same map and reaches a different conclusion. Washington, D.C., the Navy Department, Admiral Ernest King, 65 years old, will not compromise. King's Pacific strategy is the coldest and boldest of any American commander in the war. He wants to bypass the Philippines entirely. King's target is Formosa, modern Taiwan, an island 600 miles closer to Japan than Luzon. Seize Formosa and American bombers can reach the Japanese home islands more efficiently. Seize Formosa and the American submarine campaign that has already strangled Japanese shipping can be tightened into a noose. Seize Formosa and the sea lanes carrying oil from the Dutch East Indies to Japanese factories can be cut clean. Starve the empire, end the war without ever setting foot in Manila. King's logic is naval logic. Control the sea lanes and Japan collapses. The Philippines, in King's view, is a sideshow. A costly, time-consuming sideshow driven by one man's promise to a foreign people who are not, in the calculus of strategic bombing and submarine warfare, essential to victory. Nimitz does not entirely agree with King. This is the first surprise in the story of what came next. Nimitz sees merit in liberating at least part of the Philippines. He understands the strategic value of cutting Japan off from its southern resources. He understands, too, that a naval blockade alone may not force surrender against an enemy willing to fight to the last civilian. What Nimitz will not do under any circumstances is hand the fleet he has built to an army general who has never commanded a carrier task force in his life. The fleet stays under naval command. That is the line. Everything else, Nimitz is prepared to negotiate. But this is not, in the summer of 1944, a purely military decision, because 1944 is an election year. Franklin Roosevelt, 62 years old, is running for an unprecedented fourth term as President of the United States. His health is failing. His cardiovascular disease has already begun the slow decline that will kill him in April of 1945. His doctors know this, few others do, and his political position, though strong, is not invulnerable. The Republican Party has nominated Governor Thomas Dewey of New York. Dewey is young, competent, and hungry. And behind Dewey in the wings sits another Republican possibility, a man who has already been floated as a potential nominee by conservative newspapers and party operatives, Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur has not openly declared himself a candidate. He is not technically permitted to. He is a serving officer commanding troops in combat. But he has done nothing to discourage the speculation. His supporters in Chicago and New York have printed pamphlets. His name has been entered in a handful of Republican primaries earlier in 1944. The MacArthur boomlet collapsed by April, when it became clear the party would coalesce around Dewey. But the political power MacArthur commands, the loyalty he inspires among millions of voters who see him as the fighting soldier of the Pacific War, has not disappeared. Roosevelt cannot afford to publicly overrule him. Not in July of 1944, not with an election 3 months away. But Roosevelt also cannot allow a theater commander to dictate naval strategy to the Navy. So the president makes an extraordinary decision. He will travel personally to Pearl Harbor. He will sit between his two Pacific commanders and he will find a way in the space of a single meeting to resolve a strategic dispute that has festered for 2 years. On July 21st, 1944, the heavy cruiser USS Baltimore, a Baltimore-class warship of the fleet Nimitz commands, slips its moorings in San Diego Harbor. Aboard is the President of the United States in his wheelchair in a compartment specially adapted for his paralysis. The ship steams west across the Pacific. Waiting in Hawaii, Admiral Nimitz has prepared briefings, maps, projections. Waiting in Brisbane, General MacArthur has been ordered to attend. He is furious. He calls the conference a picture-taking junket. He tells his staff it is a political stunt engineered by Roosevelt to be photographed with America's most famous soldier during an election campaign. He resents being summoned across the Pacific by a president he privately despises, but he cannot refuse. On July 26th, the Baltimore drops anchor at Pearl Harbor. The heavy cruiser glides through the calm blue water of the anchorage. Her decks are lined with sailors in dress whites, standing at rigid attention. On her starboard bridge wing, a 62-year-old man watches the shoreline approach from a wheelchair rolled into place near the rail. Franklin Roosevelt has not been to Pearl Harbor since before the war. The last time American ships anchored here in peacetime, the battleships of Battleship Row were still afloat. Now, the wreckage of the Arizona rests beneath the harbor mud, and the men who died aboard her lie with it. Roosevelt's hands rest on the arms of his wheelchair. He does not speak. On the dock in the shimmering heat, Admiral Chester Nimitz waits. Beside him stand Admiral William Halsey, 61 years old, tanned and grim and famous, and the senior officers of the Pacific Fleet. Their khaki uniforms are pressed. Their shoes are polished. They are all waiting for one man who is not there. Douglas MacArthur has not arrived. The Baltimore's gangway comes down. The president is brought ashore and transferred to a waiting automobile. Roosevelt smiles, waves, exchanges pleasantries. He asks Nimitz for the general. Nimitz has no answer. MacArthur is still en route from Brisbane. He is deliberately, unmistakably, calculatedly late. He wants everyone to know it. When MacArthur's aircraft finally touches down at Hickam Field, he does not go directly to the president. He goes first to the officers' quarters. He puts on his famous crushed field marshal's cap and, despite the warm Hawaiian afternoon, a brown leather aviator's jacket that will become, in the newsreel footage shot that day, a visual signature seen by millions of Americans. Then he steps into a long, open automobile. A full motorcycle escort forms around it. Sirens howl. The convoy roars through the streets of Honolulu. Crowds gather on the sidewalks. Servicemen wave. Filipino residents cheer. MacArthur stands in the back of the car, waving his cap, smiling for the cameras. This is not a soldier reporting to his commander-in-chief. This is a triumph. By the time MacArthur reaches the estate on the slopes above Waikiki, where Roosevelt is quartered, the sun is low, and the president has been waiting for hours. Admiral Leahy, 69 years old, watching from the veranda, will later write in his memoirs that MacArthur's late arrival and his manner of arriving struck him as more theatrical than necessary. Roosevelt greets the general warmly. There is no reprimand. There cannot be. Not with photographers present, not with an election coming. Dinner is served, small talk, laughter. Roosevelt is charming. MacArthur is charming. The staff officers around them relax, briefly, because the two most difficult men in the American war effort are behaving like gentlemen. But no strategic decisions are made at dinner. The real conversation happens the next morning. July 27th, 1944. The main sitting room of the Waikiki estate, a large map of the Pacific Ocean, has been mounted. The map runs from the west coast of the United States to the coast of China. It shows every American base, every Japanese-held island, every fleet anchor room. Roosevelt, seated in an armchair, a long cigarette holder in his hand. MacArthur, standing beside the map in shirt sleeves now, no jacket, no cap. Nimitz, seated on a small sofa, folder of typewritten notes on his lap. Leahy, standing by the window, silent, observing. No stenographer is present. There will be no official transcript of what is said in this room. Everything historians know about this meeting comes from what these four men remembered afterward, and their memories do not entirely agree. But the substance is clear. MacArthur speaks first. R. He picks up a wooden pointer and steps to the map. He speaks for over an hour. He begins with the Philippines. He describes the archipelago as it is, 17 million people under Japanese occupation. He describes the American prisoners of war, the survivors of the Bataan Death March, held in camps at Cabanatuan and Bilibid, starving on rice rations and beriberi and brutal punishment. R. He describes Filipino guerrillas fighting in the mountains, waiting for the Americans to come back. Then he shifts to strategy. The Philippines, MacArthur argues, is not a sideshow. It is the strategic key to the Western Pacific. Occupy Luzon and American forces sit astride the sea lanes, carrying oil from the Dutch East Indies to Japan. Occupy Luzon and American air power reaches the South China Sea. R. Occupy Luzon and every remaining Japanese garrison south of the home islands is cut off, isolated, doomed to starve. Bypass the Philippines and the United States betrays a solemn national commitment. Then MacArthur says the thing that only he could say. He tells the president that abandoning the Philippines would be, in his words, a serious violation of the moral obligations of the United States. R. Roosevelt, listening from his armchair, does not interrupt. MacArthur does not mention that his plan requires the strategic direction of the Third Fleet, the main carrier striking force built by Nimitz. He does not mention that the campaign will be long. He does not mention Bataan by name or Corregidor or the promise he made in March of 1942 on country train platforms in South Australia. He does not have to. Every man in the room is thinking of that promise. When MacArthur finishes, Nimitz stands. He does not use the pointer. He speaks quietly, and he speaks from his notes. The case for Formosa is a case Admiral King has been making in Washington for months. Nimitz presents it fairly. Formosa lies 600 miles closer to Japan than Luzon. American bombers based on Formosa can reach the industrial heart of the Japanese home islands. R. Formosa provides direct access to the coast of China, where Chinese armies under Chiang Kai-shek are still tying down over 1 million Japanese soldiers who might otherwise be defending the home islands. Formosa can be seized more quickly than Luzon, with fewer American casualties, and without committing the fleet to months of amphibious operations across a vast archipelago. Nimitz does not attack MacArthur. That is not his way. But he makes the naval position clear. The Pacific Fleet is a naval warfighting instrument. It has its own doctrine, its own chain of command, its own tempo of operations. It cannot be handed over to a theater commander whose experience is in ground warfare. The fleet, Nimitz says, must remain under naval authority. Leahy, watching from the window, will later write that the discussion was calm, courteous, and highly informative. R. That two men who had been portrayed in the press as bitter rivals presented their views without rancor, but beneath the calm, the stakes are absolute. Nimitz has said, without saying it directly, that the fleet is not for sale. MacArthur has said, without saying it directly, that he will not accept a decision that denies him the Philippines. Roosevelt has said nothing at all. He sits and he listens and he smokes. While the American commanders talk in a hillside mansion in Hawaii, 7,000 miles to the west, another meeting is underway. Tokyo, Imperial Naval General Staff Headquarters. Admiral Soimu Toyota, 59 years old, has commanded the combined fleet since May of 1944. He has watched the Imperial Japanese Navy be ground down battle by battle, from the height of its power in 1942 to a diminished force still capable of one great blow. Toyota knows the Americans are coming, he does not know where. His staff has drawn up 4 contingency plans, codenamed Shogo, meaning victory operation. Shogo 1, the Philippines. Shogo 2, Formosa, and the Ryukyu Islands. Shogo 3, the Japanese home islands. Shogo 4, the northern approaches. Japanese intelligence is already studying American radio traffic. Japanese naval officers are already drawing up battle plans that assume correctly that the American Pacific Fleet is divided between 2 commands that will not coordinate in real time. The Japanese are watching for the seam. They intend to strike through it. Back in Hawaii late in the afternoon of July 27th, the formal briefings end. Roosevelt spends further private time with MacArthur. Whatever passes between them in that private conversation is known only from a single source. MacArthur's own account published in his memoirs in 1964, nearly 2 decades after Roosevelt's death. According to MacArthur's account, the president asked him whether Formosa or Luzon should be the target. MacArthur replied that Luzon must be liberated. Then, according to the same account, MacArthur said something to the president about the political cost of bypassing the Philippines that historians have argued about ever since. He suggested, in effect, that if Roosevelt chose Formosa and abandoned the Filipino people, the American public would not forgive it, and Roosevelt would not be re-elected. There is no other witness. Leahy did not record the exchange. Nimitz did not hear it. Roosevelt never confirmed it. He died on April 12, 1945, and took whatever passed between him and MacArthur in that room to the grave. But the story, whether MacArthur remembered it precisely or shaped it in retrospect, captures a truth that everyone in the room already understood. This was not a purely military decision. It never had been. Roosevelt smiled. He did not commit. He did not decide. He shook MacArthur's hand and he shook Nimitz's hand, and he was photographed with both of them on the veranda of the estate. And then the President of the United States boarded the USS Baltimore and sailed home to Washington. MacArthur waited for word. In the weeks that followed, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington debated. King argued for Formosa. Marshall listened. Nimitz signaled that he could accept Luzon if the fleet remained under naval command. Slowly, over August and September, the decision moved. By early September, the Joint Chiefs had authorized MacArthur to invade the southern Philippines, beginning with Leyte in the Central Archipelago on a target date in December. Then, in mid-September, American carrier raids over the Philippines encountered less Japanese air resistance than expected. Halsey at sea recommended accelerating the invasion. The Joint Chiefs concurred. The Leyte landings were moved forward 2 months to October 20th, 1944. MacArthur had his objective, but he had not won everything. Because the directive under which the operation would be executed contained a specific arrangement that MacArthur would later describe as a compromise designed to satisfy everyone. The Philippines campaign would go forward. But the Pacific Fleet would not be placed under MacArthur's command. Instead, 2 fleets would support the invasion. The 3rd Fleet, under Admiral William Halsey, 61 years old, would provide distant cover. Halsey reported to Nimitz. The 7th Fleet, under Vice Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, would handle the amphibious operations directly. Kinkaid reported to MacArthur. 2 chains of command, 2 fleets, 2 admirals, 2 chains of command, 2 theater commanders. And, by the operational arrangements MacArthur insisted upon, no direct radio communication between the 3rd and 7th Fleets on tactical matters. Every message would have to pass up through one chain of command and back down through the other. Every message, every order, every warning. It was a command structure designed to preserve the political and institutional interests of 2 rival commanders. It was not commanders. It was not designed for combat. While the Americans built their compromise, the Japanese completed their plan. By September, Japanese intelligence had determined that the American blow was likely to fall on the Philippines. Shogo 1 was activated. The plan was desperate. It was also, in its conception, brilliant. Toyota had recognized something about the American command structure that the Americans themselves had not fully grasped. The 3rd and 7th Fleets did not talk to one another. They could not coordinate their movements in real time. If the Japanese could find a way to lure one fleet out of position, the other would not know it had been left alone. The plan called for 3 separate Japanese naval forces to converge on the American landing area simultaneously. The center force, commanded by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, 55 years old, the most powerful surface force Japan had left. 5 battleships, the super-battleships Yamato and Musashi. 65,000 tons each at standard displacement, mounting 18-inch guns, the largest warships ever built, and 3 older battleships, Nagato, Congo, and Haruna, 10 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 15 destroyers. Kurita's force would steam from Brunei, thread through the central Philippines, break out through the San Bernardino Strait north of Samar Island, and fall on the American landing beaches from the east. The Southern Force, commanded by Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura, 54 years old, a quiet, austere officer who had lost his only son early in the war and fought since sense as a man with nothing left to lose. His force was smaller, 2 old battleships, Yamashiro and Fuso, 1 heavy cruiser, 4 destroyers. Nishimura would thread the Surigao Strait from the south and strike the beachhead from below, the Northern Force, commanded by Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, 58 years old and, at this moment, the most tragic figure in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Ozawa commanded what remained of the Japanese carrier fleet, 4 aircraft carriers, Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda, and almost no aircraft. The trained pilots were dead, lost in the Marianas in June, in the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where American fighters shot Japanese naval aviation out of the sky. Ozawa's carriers were almost empty. They were not intended to fight, they were intended to be seen. Ozawa's mission was to steam south from Japan, present himself to American reconnaissance, and lure Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet, the main American carrier striking force, away from the San Bernardino Strait, to draw Halsey north, away from the invasion, and open the door for Kurita's battleships. It was a suicide mission for the Northern Force. Ozawa understood this. He accepted it. If it worked, the American invasion of the Philippines would be destroyed at the water's edge. October 17th, 1944, the Japanese naval forces began to move. October 20th, MacArthur waded ashore at Leyte. Behind him, at sea, the trap was closing. The 7th Fleet under Kinkaid guarded the beaches directly. 6 old battleships, several of them salvaged from the mud of Pearl Harbor, given a second life through American industrial capacity, now brought back to fight the Japanese fleet that had struck them in 1941. Escort carriers, small, thin-skinned, slow ships never designed for battle against warships. Screens of destroyers and destroyer escorts, hundreds of transports carrying the men and supplies of the 6th Army under Kruger. Far to the north and east, the 3rd Fleet under Halsey provided distant cover, fleet carriers, light carriers, fast battleships, cruisers, destroyers, a floating steel city. The 2 fleets together represented the greatest concentration of naval power in the history of the world. But they did not talk to one another, not directly. And Halsey aboard his flagship New Jersey had been given a set of orders by Admiral Nimitz that contained, buried in its language, a fatal ambiguity. His mission was to cover the invasion, but the orders read, if opportunity for destruction of a major portion of the enemy fleet offered or could be created, such destruction would become the primary task, cover the invasion or destroy the enemy fleet. Which came first, in a moment of choice? Halsey would read those orders one way. Kinkaid on his flagship far to the south would assume they meant the other. Neither man would be able to speak directly to the other. The gap that MacArthur had insisted upon, the gap that Roosevelt had permitted, the gap that Toyota had designed his plan around, was about to open. October 23rd, 1944. Before dawn, Palawan Passage. The sea is black. The stars are fading. 2 American submarines, USS Darter and USS Dace, sit on the surface with their diesel engines, rumbling quietly, riding the swells. Their crews are at battle stations. Their torpedo tubes are flooded. 6,000 yards to the east, some of the largest surface warships ever built are steaming past them in column. Commander David McClintock, aboard the Darter, gives the order to fire. 6 torpedoes leap from the bow tubes and race across the dark water. 4 of them strike the heavy cruiser Otago, Kurita's flagship. She rolls onto her side and sinks within minutes. Kurita himself is pitched into the oil-slicked sea, swimming for his life in his uniform, before a destroyer named Kishinami hauls him aboard, half-drowned, coughing black oil onto her deck. 2 more torpedoes hit the heavy cruiser Takao and cripple her. Takao does not sink, but she turns for Brunei, out of the battle. The Dace, minutes later, puts torpedoes into the heavy cruiser Maya. She blows apart in a single catastrophic explosion. In less than an hour, before the sun has risen, the Japanese center force has lost 3 of its 10 heavy cruisers, and its commanding admiral has been dumped into the ocean. Kurita is transferred to the Super-Battleship Yamato. He is exhausted, soaked, humiliated. He is also still coming. October 24th, 1944, the Sibuyan Sea, Halsey's carrier aircraft, find the center force in the narrow waters between the Philippine Islands. For hours, wave after wave of American dive bombers and torpedo planes attack. The primary target becomes the super-battleship Musashi. Musashi is one of the 2 largest warships ever constructed. She mounts 9 18-inch guns. Her armor belt is measured in feet, not inches. She is designed to withstand punishment no earlier battleship has ever faced. The American pilots put 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs into her over the course of the afternoon. Late in the day, Musashi rolls onto her port side and sinks in the Sibuyan Sea. She takes more than 1,000 of her crew with her. Kurita turns his surviving battleships west, away from the battle. Away from San Bernardino Strait. American reconnaissance pilots see the turn. They radio Halsey. Halsey, aboard New Jersey, reads the reports. Kurita is retreating. The center force is defeated. That is the report. He passes south. But Kurita, an hour after turning away from the American aircraft, turns east again. He resumes his course for San Bernardino Strait. No American aircraft observed the second turn. Halsey does not know. Kinkaid does not know. The center force, 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light and 11 destroyers, is once again bearing down on the American invasion in the dark, unseen. The night of October 24th, Surigao Strait, Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura leads the southern force into the narrow waters south of Leyte. His son had died in the war 2 years earlier. Nishimura fights like a man who no longer expects to come home. He is sailing into an ambush. 6 Americans, all but one of them salvaged from the mud of Pearl Harbor after December 7th, 1941, wait in the darkness at the northern mouth of the strait. West Virginia, Maryland, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, Pennsylvania. The old Dreadnoughts, brought back from the dead, refit with modern radar-directed fire control, positioned in a line across the exit of the strait. They are crossing the T, the classical maneuver of naval combat. The line of enemy ships moving forward in column, presenting only their forward guns, while the American battleships turn broadside and bring every gun to bear. It has not been executed in a fleet action for nearly 40 years. It will never be executed again. Just before 4 in the morning, October 25th, the American battleships open fire. The Yamashiro takes hit after hit from 14-inch and 16-inch shells. Nishimura's flagship burns from stem to stern. She rolls over and sinks with her commander and nearly all her crew. The Fuso, struck earlier by American destroyer torpedoes, breaks apart and sinks in the darkness. The southern force is annihilated. At Pearl Harbor, 1,200 miles away, Admiral Chester Nimitz receives reports through the night. In San Pedro Bay, off Leyte, Vice Admiral Kinkaid receives the same reports and orders his old battleships to reload and stand ready. They have been fighting for hours. Their magazines are running low. Their crews are exhausted. Kinkaid believes the battle is essentially over. Kinkaid believes that Admiral Halsey, with the fast battleships of Task Force 34 and the fleet carriers of the 3rd Fleet, is guarding San Bernardino Strait to the north. Kinkaid is wrong hours earlier. The bridge of the USS New Jersey, Admiral William Halsey, 61 years old, has been given a piece of news that has electrified him. American reconnaissance aircraft have located Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's northern force. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers steaming south from the home islands, north of the American position. Carriers. Halsey has been waiting for 2 years to catch the Japanese carriers at sea. He does not know that Ozawa's carriers have almost no aircraft aboard. He does not know that Ozawa has been sent south specifically to draw him away. He believes he has been handed the greatest naval opportunity of the war. Halsey studies his orders. R. Cover the invasion. Or, if the opportunity for destruction of a major portion of the enemy fleet offers, such destruction shall become the primary task. He interprets those orders in the light of what he wants them to mean. He orders the entire Third Fleet north. Every fleet carrier, every light carrier, every fast battleship. R. Task Force 34, the surface striking force that Kinkaid assumes is guarding San Bernardino Strait, sails north with the rest of the Third Fleet. The San Bernardino Strait is left completely unguarded. Not a picket destroyer, not a submarine, not a reconnaissance plane. Halsey sends a message south. His language is ambiguous. Kinkaid, reading it in the dim light of his flag plot aboard the amphibious command ship Wasatch, understands it to mean that Task Force 34 remains at the Strait. The two fleets cannot speak directly, the compromise rule. The message passes up the chain of command, across and back down. By the time it reaches Kinkaid, hours have passed and the meaning has degraded. Nothing stands between the center force of Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita and the American invasion of the Philippines, but a handful of small ships that have no business fighting battleships. They are Task Unit 77.4.3. Their radio call sign is Taffy 3. Shortly before 7 in the morning, October 25th, 1944, 50 miles east of Samar Island, the morning is gray. A light rain is falling. R. The escort carriers of Taffy 3 are launching their first aircraft of the day, small planes intended to fly ground support missions over the lake beachhead 30 miles to the west. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, 48 years old, is on the flag bridge of the escort carrier Fanshawe Bay. He commands 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. His ships are called jeep carriers. R. They are converted merchant hulls, thin-skinned, slow, mounting a single 5-inch gun. They cannot outrun a Japanese heavy cruiser, much less a battleship. They are not intended for surface combat. They were built to protect convoys and support amphibious landings. The men aboard those ships are not, for the most part, career naval officers. They are boys from Iowa and Alabama and Brooklyn and Oregon, many enlisted after Pearl Harbor. They came in through boot camp in San Diego and Great Lakes. Many of them have never seen a Japanese warship in their lives. They expect to spend the morning launching ground attack sorties in support of American Marines and soldiers ashore. Then an anti-submarine aircraft flying north of the formation reports pagoda masts on the horizon. Pagoda masts, the distinctive superstructure of Japanese heavy warships. R. Sprague reads the report and does not initially believe it. There are no Japanese heavy warships within 400 miles of his position. Halsey is guarding the strait. Must be a pilot error. It must be some American task force. Then his own lookouts see them. Battleships. 4 of them with the pagoda mast of Yamato rising above the rest. Destroyers. The horizon fills with warships. Coming fast. Sprague picks up his handset. He gives orders that will be repeated in Navy tradition for the rest of the century. Turn into the wind. Launch every aircraft. All escorts attack. There is no time to organize a proper defense. Sprague's carriers turn east into the wind to launch every aircraft they have, then flee at their maximum speed of about 17 knots. Kurita's battleships can make 30. Sprague orders his destroyers and destroyer escorts to attack. 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts against 4 battleships and 6 heavy cruisers. The USS Johnston, a Fletcher-class destroyer, is the closest. Her commander is Ernest E. Evans, 36 years old, of Cherokee and Creek ancestry, born in Pawnee, Oklahoma. When Evans took command of Johnston in Seattle 9 months earlier, he addressed his crew on the ships, he told them. "This is going to be a fighting ship," he told them. "I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who does not want to go along should get off right now." No one got off. Without waiting for orders, Ernest Evans turns Johnston toward the Japanese fleet and orders flank speed. The little destroyer accelerates through 30 knots, throwing a rooster tail of white water astern, closing the range on Kurita's line of battleships and heavy cruisers. R, at 10,000 yards, still under fire from 8-inch and larger guns straddling the ship, Evans fires all 10 of his torpedoes at the leading heavy cruiser, Kumano. Kumano's bow is torn open. She falls out of the Japanese line, out of the battle. Then heavy shells begin to find Johnston. The destroyer takes multiple hits through her superstructure. Evans loses fingers from his left hand. His shirt is burned away. R, he continues to fight. He orders Johnston to keep firing her 5-inch guns at any Japanese ship in range. He continues to maneuver the crippled destroyer at reduced speed, drawing enemy fire away from the escort carriers. The other destroyers of Taffy 3 follow him in. The USS Hull, under Commander Leon Kentberger, charges the battleship Congo, launching torpedoes at close range. Congo turns away. R, Hull is hit by more than 40 shells before she rolls over and sinks. The USS Herman engages a heavy cruiser, then the battleship Haruna, then another cruiser in a running battle. She survives. The destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, a ship built for anti-submarine work with a single 5-inch gun and a light torpedo battery, charges a heavy cruiser and empties her torpedo tubes. R, her captain, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, informs his crew over the ship's public address system. A large Japanese fleet has been contacted. Our survival cannot be assured. We will do what damage we can. The Samuel B. Roberts is sunk. Dozens of her men die. The survivors, floating in fuel oil-soaked life jackets, will drift in the open Pacific for days. Some are attacked by sharks, some die of exposure, some die of wounds. R, those who live remember the sound of the water at night, and the men calling out to one another to stay awake, and the friends who fell silent one by one before dawn. The Gambier Bay, an escort carrier steaming for her life at 17 knots, is caught by Japanese cruisers at close range. 8-inch shells punch through her hangar deck, her flight deck, her engine rooms. She rolls over and sinks. R, she is the only American aircraft carrier lost to enemy naval gunfire in the entire Pacific War. The USS Johnston, dead in the water, surrounded by Japanese destroyers closing to finish her off, continues to fire her one remaining 5-inch gun until Evans orders abandon ship. Ernest Evans is last seen aboard the crippled destroyer, calmly issuing orders to save his surviving crew. He does not leave his command. Johnston sinks. More than 180 of her sailors die with her, including her commanding officer. As she rolls over, a Japanese destroyer passes close aboard. Her captain, a witness to the death of the American ship, is reported by survivors in the water to have saluted Johnston as she goes under. Ernest Evans is awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. R, he is the only Native American in the United States Navy to receive the Medal of Honor in the Second World War. Around 9 in the morning, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita aboard the Yamato orders his ships to break off action and reform to the north. His decision is one of the great mysteries of naval history. Kurita has in front of him escort carriers he can catch and sink. Beyond them, the invasion beaches at Leyte. Transports, LSTs. R, the 6th Army's ammunition, fuel, and supplies. Everything MacArthur needs to hold the beachhead. He has the destruction of the American invasion within his reach. He turns away. Kurita will later explain that he believed he was engaging a major fleet carrier task force and that Halsey's 3rd Fleet was closing on him from the north. He believed the American planes attacking his ships were flying from fleet carriers, not escort carriers. R, he believed the desperate torpedo runs of the American destroyers were being made by heavier ships. He believed the water off Samar contained more American power than it actually did. He was wrong on every count. But the ferocity of the attack by a handful of small ships sacrificing themselves for 6 vulnerable carriers had achieved something no admiral had ever intended. R, Kurita, exhausted, sleepless for days, half drowned 2 days earlier when the Tago went down, could not see clearly what stood in front of him. He broke off. The escort carriers of Taffy 3 and the American invasion of the Philippines survived. At Pearl Harbor, 1,200 miles away, Admiral Chester Nimitz has been receiving reports through the morning. Reports that Kurita Center Force has emerged from San Bernardino Strait. Reports that Taffy 3 is being destroyed. Reports that the Third Fleet is nowhere near the battle. Nimitz orders a message drafted to Admiral Halsey. The message is encoded. Under standard naval procedure at the time, padding was added at the beginning and end of coded messages to make cryptanalysis more difficult. The padding was supposed to be nonsense, meaningless words that the recipient would remove. The plain text message reads, "Where is repeat? Where is Task Force 34? The padding at the beginning reads, "Turkey trots to water." The padding at the end reads, "The world wonders." Neither phrase was meant as commentary. Neither phrase was meant as insult. The choice of padding was, by tradition, kept obscure and slightly strange to prevent the enemy from guessing at the plain text boundaries. The communications officer aboard New Jersey removes the beginning padding. He does not remove the end padding because he judges it might be part of the message. Admiral Halsey reads the decoded signal. Where is, repeat, where is Task Force 34? The world wonders. He believes his commander-in-chief is publicly rebuking him. He tears his cap from his head. He throws it on the deck of the flag bridge. He weeps briefly in front of his chief of staff. Then he composes himself, orders part of the Third Fleet to reverse course and steam south. He arrives off San Bernardino Strait too late to catch Kurita's retreating force. The battle is over. The Imperial Japanese Navy loses at Leyte Gulf 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Approximately 10,000 Japanese sailors die. The fleet that had dominated the Western Pacific for 3 years never sails again in force. Only the suicide sortie of the Yamato at Okinawa 7 months later remains. American losses are far lighter. 1 light carrier, USS Princeton, sunk by air attack on October 24th. 2 escort carriers, Gambier Bay and St. Lo, the latter destroyed by one of the first organized kamikaze attacks of the war. 2 destroyers, Johnston and Hull. 1 destroyer escort, Samuel B. Roberts. Several thousand American sailors dead across the 4 separate engagements. The margin of survival off Samar is measured in the minutes Ernest Evans bought with his torpedoes and in the fatal misjudgment of Admiral Kurita. Neither margin was strategy. Both were accident. Had Kurita pressed his attack for another 2 hours, the transports at Leyte would have been slaughtered. MacArthur's 6th Army, ashore without resupply, would have been in serious peril. The strategic disaster that followed would have been the worst the United States Navy had suffered since Pearl Harbor. The gap between the 2 American fleets, the gap that MacArthur had insisted upon and Roosevelt had permitted and Toyota had designed his plan around, had opened exactly as Toyota intended. It closed because a Japanese admiral, half a world from home and half broken by days without sleep, could not see clearly. Nimitz never publicly criticized Halsey. He never publicly criticized MacArthur. He never said, "I told you so." That was not his way. In December of 1944, 6 weeks after Leyte Gulf, Chester Nimitz was promoted to Fleet Admiral. 5 star. He continued to direct the Pacific Fleet through the invasions of Iwo Jima in February of 1945 and Okinawa in April of 1945. Operations that could not have been sustained if the fleet had been fractured under a single theater command. In the same month, December of 1944, Douglas MacArthur was promoted to General of the Army, 5 stars. He continued his campaign across the Philippines, an operation that would ultimately cost more than 10,000 American lives and tens of thousands wounded. He liberated Manila. He fulfilled his promise. Some military historians have argued that a number of those casualties were unnecessary, that his insistence on liberating every major island of the archipelago rather than bypassing isolated Japanese garrisons cost lives that could have been saved. Those historians may be right, or they may also be missing the point, because MacArthur had made a promise in March of 1942 on a country train platform in South Australia to men he had left behind to die. And a promise once made is not a strategic calculation. September 2nd, 1945. Tokyo Bay, aboard the battleship USS Missouri. The deck is crowded. The delegation from the Japanese government stands at the front in top hats and morning coats. The Allied commanders stand behind them. Thousands of American sailors watch from the surrounding ships. General Douglas MacArthur, 65 years old, presides over the ceremony as Supreme Commander for the Allied powers. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, 60 years old, signs the instrument of Japanese surrender on behalf of the United States of America. The two men stand within a few feet of one another. The general who demanded the fleet, the admiral who refused to give it. The war is over. More than 200 fighting ships fought at Leyte Gulf. It was the largest naval battle in the history of the world. Whether Roosevelt's compromise saved the alliance or nearly lost the war depends on which moment you choose to remember. MacArthur waiting ashore at Leyte, keeping a promise made in the dark on a Corregidor dock, or the destroyers of Taffy III, charging battleships they had no business fighting, buying minutes that should never have needed buying with the lives of men whose names most of America has now forgotten. Some of those men are still remembered by families who kept the telegrams. Some are remembered only by the shipmates who came home. Perhaps among those watching this today, there is a son or a nephew or a grandson of a sailor who stood on a deck in the Pacific in the autumn of 1944. If so, you belong to a line this country should not forget. The Pacific War ended on a battleship deck in Tokyo Bay. It was won and nearly lost on a gray morning off Samar Island, where the sea gave up nothing and asked for everything, and the men who paid the price were the ones who had spoken up the least in the rooms where the decisions were made.